Nathan Cole had already signed the document ending Amara Bennett's career when she placed one final sentence between them like a match beside gasoline. "Before you approve the merger," she said calmly, "ask why Line 7 has been running after midnight." Beyond his glass office, Atlanta shone beneath a clear October sky, while directors waiting down the hall believed the greatest obstacle to their billion-dollar agreement had just been removed. Nathan looked at the separation papers, then at the woman who had spent 8 years making Cole Industries appear stronger than it truly was. He wanted to ask what she meant, but pride arrived faster than curiosity, reminding him that leaders who had made a decision should not sound uncertain. Amara closed her portfolio, thanked him for their years together, and walked toward the door without requesting more money, more time, or another chance. The merger with Meridian Systems promised automated technology that could double production while reducing costs across 6 states. Investors loved the projections, and Nathan loved the chance to prove that the company inherited from his father could become something larger than family history. Only Amara had resisted, demanding independent safety tests, pension protections, and guarantees that no plant would close during the first 18 months. Board Chairman Victor Hale called her objections emotional interference, while Meridian's chief executive, Graham Pierce, warned that investors would never trust divided leadership. Nathan defended her until a confidential report blamed her for costly delays and suggested Meridian might withdraw. By the time he placed the envelope on his desk, he had convinced himself that removing one executive was the responsible price of protecting 12,000 jobs. Amara paused when Nathan asked whether Line 7 presented an immediate danger. "The threat is not the machine," she replied. "It is the reason someone needs it running while the plant is empty." She said 2 supervisors were preserving records after her earlier concerns had been buried beneath revised reports, and their jobs would disappear if their names surfaced too soon. Nathan felt irritation rise because the accusation suggested disloyalty inside his company, and because Amara had trusted unnamed employees more than him. "You should have told me sooner," he said. Amara held his gaze without raising her voice. "I did. You heard delay when I was saying danger." Nathan returned to the boardroom, where Victor announced that leadership realignment was complete and invited everyone to approve the final merger schedule. Before Nathan could mention Line 7, Graham presented forecasts showing that every week of delay could cost $40 million in lost contracts. Directors nodded impatiently, and Nathan knew a vague warning from a dismissed executive would sound like wounded pride. He ordered a 72-hour review instead of signing, describing it as routine diligence rather than doubt. Victor's smile tightened before he agreed, while Graham reminded everyone that Meridian's offer expired Friday evening. Nathan told himself 3 days were enough to determine whether Amara's final words represented evidence or resentment. That night he drove alone to the Nashville plant because he did not want a formal visit announced in advance. The facility appeared quiet from the highway, yet at 11:47, 2 unmarked trucks entered through a freight gate without stopping at security. Nathan watched temporary workers unlock a section officially listed as inactive, then saw Line 7 awaken beneath white factory lights. Its robotic arms moved with mechanical precision, even though no regular night shift appeared on the schedule. The plant manager claimed Meridian engineers were conducting an emergency calibration test, although no authorization had reached corporate operations. Nathan demanded the digital form and found Amara's executive approval code attached to a request she had rejected in writing. The timestamp came from an external server, registered to Meridian Systems, but the manager blamed an administrative transfer. Nathan photographed the screen, then noticed finished pressure regulators stacked beside the line, each marked for shipment to municipal water facilities rather than internal testing. One regulator carried a red inspection tag reading "Failed Tolerance," yet someone had crossed out the warning and replaced it with green approval. A maintenance supervisor named Luis approached while the manager answered a call and whispered that Amara had shut Line 7 down after discovering the software sometimes ignored pressure limits. Meridian engineers had restarted it using copied credentials. 2 employees who questioned the shipments had been transferred, and another had vanished from the schedule. Luis pressed a flash drive into Nathan's hand, explaining that Amara had asked him to preserve machine logs somewhere the integration team could not erase them. Before Nathan could ask more, alarms flashed across the line, and one robotic arm froze above an unfinished regulator. The manager shouted for everyone to clear the area as the control panel displayed pressure far beyond the approved limit. A technician reached for the emergency stop, only to discover that the button had been disabled by the software Meridian wanted installed across every coal industries facility. Nathan stared at the frozen arm, the falsified approval, and the flash drive in his palm, realizing that he had not removed an obstacle from the merger. He had removed the one person who knew why the merger might destroy everything he believed he was protecting. The technician restored the emergency circuit manually, and the robotic arm stopped inches above the regulator before the pressure chamber ruptured. No one was injured, but Nathan ordered the line sealed, every shipment held, and all Meridian personnel removed until an independent inspection could begin. Luis agreed to speak with investigators only if his identity remained protected, explaining that his daughter's health insurance depended upon his position. Nathan promised protection, although the words felt fragile after he had dismissed the executive who tried to provide exactly that. Before dawn, he sent the flash drive to an outside laboratory rather than his own technology department, because he no longer knew which internal channel could be trusted. At headquarters the following morning, Victor treated the shutdown as an unfortunate misunderstanding created by overeager engineers. He argued that prototype software occasionally required temporary overrides and warned that public disclosure could frighten customers before anyone understood the facts. Graham joined by video, expressing concern that Amara might have encouraged employees to manufacture a crisis after her departure. Nathan watched him speak with polished disappointment, then placed the falsified approval form on the conference table. Graham denied knowing how Meridian's server had accessed Amara's credentials, while Victor suggested a cyber attack unrelated to the merger. Neither man asked whether defective regulators had already left the facility. Nathan contacted Amara from the private elevator, but she declined the first call and answered only after he left a message mentioning Luis and the disabled emergency stop. Her silence lasted several seconds before she asked whether anyone had been hurt. Nathan explained what happened, then admitted that her warning had been justified. Amara did not offer him the relief of anger or forgiveness. She said the software failure was only one piece of a larger pattern involving falsified inspections, hidden production runs, and planned layoffs disguised as automation savings. She had begun tracing the pattern after a quality engineer named Tessa Morgan discovered that Meridian's predictive system deleted unfavorable test results during overnight synchronization. Tessa had agreed to testify, but she disappeared from work 3 days before Amara's dismissal and had not answered personal messages since. Nathan asked why Amara had not gone directly to federal regulators. She explained that the available records showed manipulation, but not who authorized it, while premature accusations could expose Tessa and Luis without stopping the merger. Amara had requested an independent audit through Coal's ethics committee, yet Victor redirected the complaint to the same integration team under suspicion. Her final attempt was the safety memorandum Nathan received as a summary describing implementation delays. Hearing the phrase made him remember signing the report between 2 investor calls without opening its attachments. Amara told him that regret would not protect workers, and that his next decision mattered more than any apology. The outside laboratory confirmed that Meridian software altered machine logs after each night shift, replacing pressure failures with acceptable readings. More troubling, 800 regulators had already shipped to water systems across Tennessee, Georgia, and Kentucky. A public recall would damage coal industries, threaten the merger, and possibly trigger criminal investigations, yet delaying could place entire communities at risk if the defects caused system failures. Victor urged Nathan to conduct quiet replacements during routine maintenance, insisting that no confirmed malfunction had occurred. Nathan remembered his father teaching him that reputation took decades to build, then realized the board now wanted to preserve that reputation by gambling with people who had never consented to the risk. He authorized an immediate recall and notified regulators before the vote could occur. News broke before noon, sending Coal's stock downward and reporters toward every company entrance. Meridian suspended negotiations, claiming Coal Industries had violated confidentiality and overreacted to preliminary data. Victor called an emergency board meeting to question Nathan's fitness, while customers demanded explanations and employees feared layoffs. Amid the chaos, Nathan received an email from Tessa's personal account containing only a photograph of a storage locker number and the words, "Amara was right, but they know where my brother works." The message had been scheduled 3 days earlier, suggesting Tessa expected to lose access to her devices. Nathan forwarded it to federal investigators, then drove to the storage facility with counsel and law enforcement rather than acting alone. Inside the locker they found inspection reports, payroll records, and video recordings of Meridian engineers ordering night crews to bypass safety controls. One folder contained proposed post-merger closures affecting 4 coal plants, contradicting the promises Graham had made during negotiations. Another document listed retention bonuses for Victor and 3 directors if the transaction closed before the end of the quarter. Yet the most damaging file was a recording of Victor telling Graham that Amara had to be removed before she connected the defective software to the closure plan. Nathan listened to his chairman describe her integrity as an operational liability, then heard his own name used as the easiest path around her. At the end of the recording, Graham asked what would happen if Nathan discovered the truth. Victor laughed softly and answered, "By then, he will have signed it, and men like Nathan protect their decisions long after they stop believing in them." Nathan replayed Victor's final sentence until anger gave way to recognition, because the chairman had accurately identified his habit of defending decisions after evidence changed. Federal investigators secured the locker, while counsel warned that releasing the recording before authentication could expose Coal Industries to lawsuits from Meridian and its own directors. At the emergency board meeting, Victor described the recording as fabricated and accused Nathan of sacrificing shareholder value to rescue his conscience. 3 directors supported removing Nathan temporarily, arguing that his judgment had become compromised by guilt over Amara. Nathan answered that guilt was irrelevant. Defective parts, altered logs, and secret plant closures were facts. The vote stalled when General Counsel Rebecca Sloan requested 24 hours to authenticate the files. Nathan wanted to address employees immediately, but Rebecca warned that promises made before reviewing cash reserves could become another form of deception. The recall alone might cost $200 million, and Meridian had frozen a financing agreement Coal needed to complete a new facility. If lenders withdrew, Nathan could protect customers while still losing thousands of jobs. The moral choice and practical choice no longer appeared on opposite sides, because both required a solution he did not yet possess. Amara learned about the recording from investigators, not from Nathan, which she appreciated because it proved he had stopped treating her as a private source of absolution. At the Community Enterprise Center, Tessa arrived through a side entrance carrying a small backpack. After threats involving her brother's immigration sponsorship, Tessa had hidden with a former roommate and avoided every device connected to her name. Amara told her that responsibility belonged to the people who created the danger, although courage now required telling the truth where it could be tested. Tessa agreed to testify if her brother received independent legal protection and if workers disciplined for refusing the night shifts were reinstated. The next morning, federal agents escorted Tessa into Coal headquarters through the employee entrance rather than the executive garage. She provided authentication codes, proving the locker files came from Meridian's internal system, and identified the software architect who designed the log deletion function. She also revealed that the defects were not accidental. Meridian needed Coal's factories to demonstrate rapid production before announcing a government contract, and failed tests threatened the schedule. Victor helped create unauthorized night shifts because a successful demonstration would increase the merger price and trigger his bonus. The planned plant closures were intended to eliminate experienced quality teams after the transaction, replacing them with lower-cost contractors less likely to challenge the automated system. Amara had discovered the first connection when workers reported that inspection failures appeared only in handwritten logs, never in digital summaries. Nathan asked Tessa why she had trusted Amara instead of the ethics committee. Tessa looked toward Victor's empty chair and said Amara was the only executive who asked what retaliation would cost the employee, not merely what silence would cost the company. When the authentication report arrived, Rebecca confirmed that the recording and documents were genuine. Victor resigned before the board could remove him, while Meridian announced that Graham had taken temporary leave pending investigation. The recall remained incomplete, customers still needed answers, and Cole's financing crisis had worsened overnight. Nathan held a company-wide meeting from the factory floor instead of the executive auditorium. He explained the recall, the manipulated tests, and his decision to dismiss Amara despite her repeated warnings. He did not mention confidential witness details, but he accepted responsibility for building a culture where polished summaries mattered more than inconvenient questions. Employees listened in silence until a machinist asked whether plants would close to pay for leadership's mistakes. Nathan answered honestly that closures were possible unless the company found new financing, and he refused to guarantee jobs he could not yet protect. After the meeting, union representatives, plant managers, and suppliers requested seats in the recovery discussions. Nathan accepted, although several executives warned that sharing financial information would weaken his bargaining position. Amara attended only after workers invited her as an independent advisor, and she refused the chair Nathan offered beside him, choosing a place among the operational teams. Together they examined alternatives, selling patents, delaying expansion, negotiating customer advances, and converting executive bonuses into emergency reserves. Near midnight, a small supplier from Birmingham proposed something no investment bank had considered. Hundreds of community manufacturers depended upon Cole's survival, and together they could form a purchasing consortium, provide temporary capacity, and preserve contracts while recalled parts were replaced. The plan could work, but only if Cole shared future opportunities with companies it had historically treated as replaceable vendors. Nathan looked across the table at Amara, understanding the symmetry before she spoke. Amara said the consortium would not accept charity, publicity, or promises that disappeared after the crisis. It required enforceable contracts, transparent pricing, apprenticeship commitments, and voting power over regional workforce decisions. Nathan agreed immediately, but Amara warned that agreement under pressure was easy. Respect would be measured after the pressure ended. Before he could respond, Rebecca entered with news that Cole's largest lender had accelerated its debt covenant. They had 48 hours to secure $90 million, or the bank could force asset sales before the consortium ever began. Nathan's finance team recommended selling the Nashville facility, arguing that its land value could satisfy the covenant while production moved elsewhere. Amara asked what would happen to 800 families dependent upon the plant, including workers who had protected the public by refusing unsafe orders. Nathan rejected the immediate sale, then asked the consortium representatives what they needed to commit capital and production support. They requested access to contracts, equipment, training, and decisions long kept behind corporate walls. Amara proposed a cooperative purchasing a minority interest through suppliers, employee funds, and community lenders. Cole would retain its technology, while the cooperative received production agreements and 2 workforce and safety board seats. The structure could raise only $60 million within 48 hours, leaving a $30 million gap. Nathan offered to pledge his personal shares as collateral, but Rebecca warned that the board could interpret the move as self-dealing if the terms benefited his control. Amara suggested something harder. Nathan should surrender voting rights attached to the pledged shares until the recall ended, allowing an independent trustee to protect the company from decisions driven by his position. He agreed, understanding that saving Cole might require giving up the authority he had spent his life accumulating. Tessa attended the meeting, and quietly reminded directors that small suppliers had caught defects Meridian's celebrated software erased. Luis described how experienced workers recognized pressure changes by sound before sensors registered danger, and a plant nurse explained what closure would do to families already carrying medical debt. With 12 hours remaining, Victor appeared through counsel and offered to purchase the Nashville plant using a private equity fund, providing enough cash to satisfy the lender. His proposal preserved immediate employment for 6 months, after which the buyer could automate operations without restrictions. The board scheduled a final vote for 6 that evening. Before it began, Amara met Nathan in the empty hallway, where employees had once watched her leave with a sealed envelope. He admitted that Victor's offer might be the only legally certain way to prevent default. Amara did not tell him what to choose, because she knew responsibility became meaningless when someone else supplied the courage. She asked what promise Cole Industries had made by recalling the regulators. Nathan answered that the company had chosen people over appearances. Then the next decision cannot say those people matter only when protecting them is affordable, she replied. At the meeting, Nathan rejected Victor's offer and presented the cooperative structure, along with his surrender of voting rights and a plan to eliminate executive bonuses for 2 years. The board remained divided until Rebecca revealed that 3 major water authorities had agreed to prepay future orders if Cole adopted independent safety oversight. Those commitments closed $22 million of the gap. The Community Enterprise Center secured $5 million through local development funds, while employees voluntarily redirected a portion of profit-sharing reserves under terms protecting pensions. Only $3 million remained, and the lender refused another extension. Nathan prepared to announce failure when Graham's former software architect entered with federal counsel and offered evidence that Meridian had charged Cole fraudulent licensing fees exceeding that amount. The claim could not produce cash before the deadline, but Rebecca used the authenticated invoices to obtain an emergency court order freezing Meridian payments already scheduled from Cole's account. The preserved funds satisfied the covenant with 11 minutes remaining. The board approved the cooperative, independent safety seats and permanent whistleblower protections. It also required Nathan to remain chief executive only during a 12-month monitored recovery, after which employees and directors would evaluate whether he had earned continued trust. Nathan accepted without negotiation, knowing accountability meant allowing consequences to remain visible after the emergency passed. When the meeting ended, employees gathered in the lobby as news of the agreement spread through phones and whispered conversations. Luis learned that every transferred worker would be reinstated with back pay, while Tessa accepted a role leading an independent data integrity office reporting outside executive management. Amara declined an offer to return as chief operating officer, explaining that the company needed systems capable of honoring truth without depending upon one person's presence. Instead, Nathan requested that the Community Enterprise Center help design the cooperative's leadership program as an equal-paid partner. Amara agreed to present the proposal to her board, then returned the old separation envelope Nathan had once placed before her. Inside, she had left the check untouched and added a single page listing every employee whose warnings had been ignored before the recall. "Do not build the next chapter around what you learned from losing me," she said. "Build it around making sure nobody else must lose everything before being heard." Nathan unfolded the list and recognized names from departments he had passed for years without truly seeing. At the bottom, beneath Tessa and Luis, one final name had been written in Amara's steady hand. It was Nathan's, followed by a question he could not answer quickly. When leadership becomes afraid of the truth, who is responsible for telling the leader? The question followed Nathan whenever an employee hesitated or an executive offered conclusions without evidence. Cole Industries replaced private integration meetings with review panels that included machinists, engineers, suppliers, and customer representatives. The changes slowed decisions, but exposed failures before they reached production. Nathan attended every safety session without sitting at the head of the table. And when employees criticized the old culture, he resisted the instinct to explain what pressures had shaped his choices. The recall consumed nearly all available reserves, yet no defective regulator caused a public system failure because customers replaced them before installation. Meridian faced federal charges, Graham resigned permanently, and Victor was indicted for conspiracy, fraud, and witness intimidation. Under Amara's center's guidance, Cole created protected reporting channels, managed by outside trustees, and required every major proposal to include a written account of who carried its risks. Investors pressed Nathan to restore profit margins. Some directors wanted the cooperative's board seats reduced, and several senior executives complained that community review weakened authority. Nathan could have used the recall as a temporary justification, then quietly returned to old habits once public attention moved elsewhere. Instead, he published quarterly reports comparing financial results with worker injuries, retention, supplier stability, and community effects. The first report showed lower profits, fewer defects, and record employee trust. Amara continued building the Community Enterprise Center, rather than returning to Cole. The untouched separation payment became seed money for a legal defense fund supporting workers who reported safety violations at smaller companies without strong unions or public attention. Tessa confronted Amara gently, asking why she still refused credit when visibility might attract more support. Amara answered that anonymity was not always virtue. Sometimes people needed a name to trust. She agreed to lead a public campaign, not around her sacrifice, but around the workers whose courage made safe products possible. As the 12-month review approached, the board invited employees, suppliers, lenders, and cooperative representatives to evaluate Nathan's leadership. Workers praised his transparency, but questioned why executive compensation remained so much higher than plant wages. Suppliers valued guaranteed contracts, but wanted faster payment terms. Community representatives supported apprenticeships while demanding stronger commitments to neighborhoods affected by expansion. Nathan answered each concern with dates, proposed changes, or admissions where no solution existed. The final vote took place at the Nashville plant, beside the restored Line 7, which now operated with independent controls and a physical emergency system no software could override. Luis demonstrated the new safety process, while apprentices from local technical colleges observed every step. Tessa presented audit results showing that handwritten worker reports and digital records now received equal evidentiary weight. The board voted to retain Nathan, but only after adopting renewable 3-year terms for future chief executives and granting employees a permanent role in leadership evaluations. After the meeting, Amara found him standing beside the machine that had nearly exposed his failure through catastrophe. Nathan thanked her for helping save the company, and she corrected him gently. The workers saved it, the customers gave you time, the suppliers gave you capacity. You finally stopped standing in their way. He smiled because the answer would once have wounded his pride, while now it felt accurate. He asked whether she believed he had changed enough, and Amara said change was not a destination awarded by another person. It was a pattern revealed when the easier choice returned, and no audience remained to reward resistance. Nathan then showed her a proposal for a national network connecting ethical manufacturers, community colleges, and worker-owned suppliers. Cole would provide equipment and contracts, while the Community Enterprise Center would control training standards and community selection. Amara studied the document carefully, finding no hidden authority clause and no branding requirement that placed Cole above its partners. She agreed to recommend it, provided workers received ownership pathways rather than temporary opportunities. Nathan accepted, then offered his hand as one leader approaching another, without the assumption that wealth gave him the right to define the relationship. Before she shook it, Amara removed the original list from her notebook and pointed to the question written beside Nathan's name. She told him the answer was not a heroic advisor brave enough to confront a powerful man. The answer had to be everyone, protected by systems that made truth safer than silence. Nathan nodded, then watched her add a second sentence beneath the first. A leader becomes trustworthy only when people can correct him without risking their future. Together they walked toward the training floor, where a new generation of workers was learning that skill and dignity should never be separated by the people who controlled opportunity. 1 year later, the first graduating class from the regional manufacturing network gathered inside a converted warehouse on Atlanta's west side. The former warehouse now held training labs, small business workshops, and community college classrooms. Families filled folding chairs beneath banners carrying no corporate slogan, only the names of apprentices completing certifications in robotics, quality control, and industrial maintenance. Some arrived after layoffs or military service, while others had been told technical careers belonged to people with connections. Nathan stood near the back, instead of joining dignitaries on stage. Beside him, Luis watched his daughter receive a safety engineering certificate, while Tessa prepared to announce a scholarship funded by settlements recovered from Meridian. Nathan understood that invisible leadership was not leadership without recognition. It was leadership that refused to make recognition the price others paid for receiving help. The ceremony included one difficult moment, when a graduate named Caleb described losing his previous job after reporting defective medical components. The legal defense fund created from Amara's separation payment had helped him challenge the retaliation, while the training network offered a path back, without asking him to remain silent about what happened. Caleb thanked Amara publicly, and she did not redirect the praise as she once might have done. Instead, she accepted it, then asked everyone to recognize the workers whose warnings were still ignored, because no powerful company depended upon hearing them. After the graduates crossed the stage, the network announced 12 new worker-owned suppliers and 3 training centers scheduled to open across the Southeast. Coal Industries would not control them, although it guaranteed purchase agreements long enough for each organization to establish independent customers. The model earned less immediate profit, but created stable capacity, lower defects, and communities invested in growth. Nathan therefore required every orientation program to include the recall, Amara's dismissal, and the decisions that allowed Meridian's scheme to advance. Later that evening, Nathan and Amara walked through the quiet training floor after families departed. Machines stood beneath dimmed lights, surrounded by handwritten notes graduates had left for the next class. Nathan showed her a glass display containing the disabled emergency switch from Line 7, preserved not as a symbol of disaster, but as evidence of what happened when technology outranked human judgment. Beside it rested Amara's original safety memorandum, now displayed in full, rather than reduced, to the misleading summary Nathan had once accepted. Amara replied that shame became useful only when it protected other people from repeating the same mistake. Otherwise, it was merely another way to keep attention upon oneself. Nathan asked whether she ever regretted not returning to Coal Industries. Amara considered the question while looking through the windows toward classrooms bearing the names of local educators and retired machinists. She said she missed certain people and the satisfaction of solving difficult problems with teams she trusted, but she did not miss belonging to a structure that once required her dismissal before recognizing her voice. She had discovered that her work was never to make one company depend upon her. It was to help people build institutions that remained honorable when no exceptional person stood nearby to prevent failure. Before they left, Nathan handed her a small envelope containing the original unsigned separation agreement. He had kept no copy of the check, only the page bearing his authorization and her calm signature. Amara studied it briefly, then placed it inside a recycling bin beside discarded training manuals. She answered that paper became powerful only when people continued obeying the meaning attached to it. That document once said her value could be calculated, compensated, and removed. Everything surrounding them now proved otherwise, so preserving it would grant an old mistake more authority than it deserved. They stepped outside beneath a warm evening sky as graduates posed for photographs beside parents, mentors, and children. Luis's daughter waved from across the parking lot, while Caleb introduced his family to the technicians who would become his business partners. Nathan watched opportunities forming through ordinary conversations and recognized that none depended upon his title alone. Wealth had helped purchase machines, But trust had convinced people to share knowledge, take risks, and build together. Amara turned toward the illuminated warehouse and said the greatest mistake leaders made was not believing good people were replaceable. It was believing the cost of losing them would appear immediately on a financial statement. Sometimes the loss emerged slowly through silence, hesitation, and the disappearance of trust. While the building remained open and every report still looked successful, Nathan asked what the greatest correction was, expecting another difficult answer. Amara smiled and said it began when leaders stopped asking how to keep remarkable people and started building places where ordinary people could speak remarkable truths without fear. Together they returned to the celebration, no longer as employer and dismissed executive, but as equal partners inside a future neither could have built alone.